Is Israel trying to expel Palestinians from Gaza? Will Israel be convicted of committing genocide? And how exactly did Netanyahu manage to blow everyone's minds last week? We'll get there, but first, let's look at the top stories from last week. The top story in Israel last week was South Africa's case at the International Court of Justice at The Hague, accusing Israel of genocide, a claim Israel and the US entirely dismiss as preposterous.
It's outrageous, egregious, preposterous.
Definitely preposterous.
And while Israel usually refuses to take part in these kinds of tribunals at The Hague, this time around, a strong Israeli legal team showed up to defend the Jewish state, implying Israel believes it can successfully defend itself from the claims. If Israel was convicted, it would be the first time the ICJ would judge a country as being responsible for genocide. Not surprisingly, South Africa's legal team failed to mention Hamas's openly stated mission to destroy the state of Israel and kick out all the Jews of the land, which, according to international law, would be an act of genocide. The IDF spokesperson announced that the war had shifted to a stage that would involve fewer ground troops and airstrikes, at least in northern Gaza, where Israeli forces have largely taken control. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said that Israel would be shifting from an intense maneuvering phase of the war to different types of special operations.
Yeah, totally. That makes sense.
But Hezbollah-affiliated Lebanese outlet Al Mayadeen reported on disagreements within Israel's security cabinet, noting that despite Israel's reports, so-called resistance fighters continue to launch attacks from northern neighborhoods in Gaza. And Israeli Yediot Aharonot pointed out that the IDF's announcement came just in time for U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken to arrive in Israel. The IDF announcement came as Israel has been under immense pressure to rein in the destruction in Gaza and alleviate the humanitarian catastrophe there. Points surely covered in Blinken's whirlwind tour, meeting with leaders in Turkey, Greece, Jordan, Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and finally the PA's Mahmoud Abbas, all in order to craft a course forward and prevent the war from spreading to Lebanon, the broader region, and possibly the rest of the world and beyond. Meanwhile, right-wing mainstay Israel Hayom read a short piece in which Benny Gantz appeared to defend his political opponent and recent unity government partner, Bibi Netanyahu. See, the Washington Post ran an expose revealing concerns within the U.S. administration that Bibi is incentivized to escalate in the north as a way to save his political career. But Gantz hit back saying that the only consideration is Israel's security and that all members of the cabinet share this opinion. The Washington Post article quoted the defense minister saying, "We prefer the path of an agreed-upon diplomatic settlement, but we're getting close to the point where the hourglass will turn over."
Them's fighting words.
Speaking of diplomatic settlements, Saudi Arabia's ambassador to the UK told the BBC his country still believed in normalizing relations with Israel despite the deplorable death toll in Gaza, but that it would not come at the cost of the Palestinian people, warning of a failure of humanity to address the dire situation in Gaza. As a side note, many people believe the October 7th massacre was carried out to prevent an Israeli-Saudi normalization deal. BBC Arabic quoted the ambassador saying,
"If anyone else had done what the Israelis are doing today, you would have seen them cut off from the international community. You would have seen people talking about sanctions."
As another side note, BBC Arabic has still not reported on October 7th sexual assaults, aside from taking an Israeli report out of context to say Israel is having trouble finding real victims of sexual assault committed on October 7th. An absolutely deplorable piece of reporting, which may not have anything to do with the Saudi statements, but this is my show and I could say whatever I want. Israel continued to argue that it's the UN's inefficiency limiting aid to Gaza, insisting that there's no shortage of food there. The BBC Arabic reported that Israel had agreed to a proposed sea corridor for aid, but the proposal was immediately rejected by the Palestinian Authority. The PA followed up saying it was reviewing the proposal.
Let me get back to you.
As protests in Israel continue to push the government to do whatever possible to bring home the hostages, there were reports by Israeli media that the U.S. called on Israel to allow Palestinians to begin returning to their homes in northern Gaza. In response, Israeli leaders said Palestinians can only begin returning if progress is made in the efforts to return 136 Israelis that are still held hostage in Gaza. According to Qatar's Emir, negotiations on hostage release collapsed after the assassination of Hamas deputy Saleh al-Aruri in Beirut last week, but reports of ongoing talks still continue to spread. Speaking of assassinations, as Hezbollah continued daily rockets and drone attacks on Israel's north, a senior member of Hezbollah's military was killed in an Israeli airstrike. Then, at his funeral, another commander was killed. Not to be outdone in the contest for the best destabilizer of the Middle East, the Houthi rebels this week launched their largest missile and drone attack on Red Sea shipping lanes, continuing to disrupt the flow of goods in the region, including aid headed to Gaza. The UN Security Council voted to condemn the Houthi attacks. And on Thursday, a US-led coalition hit more than a dozen Houthi targets in Yemen. Right-wing Israeli government ministers continue to make statements about encouraging Palestinians to leave Gaza, including Bezalel Smotrich, who urged the opening of Gaza's gates for the voluntary emigration of refugees, as the international community has acted regarding refugees from Syria and from Ukraine. Al Jazeera, Arab 48, and Haaretz cited calls by ultra-nationalist minister Benny Gvir, saying that encouraging the migration of Gazans will allow us to return the residents of the border of the Gaza Strip and the residents of the Gush Katif settlements to their homeland.
Not helping!
Israeli Heritage Minister Amichai Eliyahu clarified, "We're talking about improving the housing conditions of Gazans for those who want it."
You're not helpful. You're not helpful.
In response to such statements, a joint statement issued by the presidents of Egypt, Jordan, and the PA rejected Israeli attempts to liquidate the Palestinian state and separate Gaza and the West Bank, which are considered an extension of the future Palestinian state. The international community responded to the right-wing minister's statements with a head-exploding emoji, with Israel's media reporting Blinken's comments that the U.S. unequivocally rejects any proposals advocating for the resettlement of Palestinians outside of Gaza, a sentiment reiterated by the Israeli president and prime minister.
Israel has no intention of permanently occupying Gaza or displacing its civilian population.
So I guess that's some good news. The bad news is that the death toll in Gaza rose to over 23,000, according to the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry, with Israel estimating nearly 9,000 of those are militants, terrorists, bad guys, whatever it is you call them. But the blurry line between civilians and terrorists made headlines this week, starting on Sunday with what Israel said was a strike on a drone-operating terror operative. But inside the vehicle, there were 2 journalists, and Al Jazeera reported the journalists were targeted. Then on Wednesday, Israel released intelligence showing that the so-called journalists were actually commanders in Hamas and in Islamic Jihad. And so, like many stories, this one will now split into 2 completely different narratives, as Hamas insists Israel is targeting journalists, and Israel insists terrorists are posing as journalists, putting further civilian lives at risk. And finally, U.S. President Joe Biden spoke at a historic South Carolina church where 9 black worshipers were killed by a white supremacist in 2015. At the event, he was interrupted by attendees protesting U.S. support for Israel's war against Hamas. Note how calm and respectful Biden acts towards the people heckling him from the audience, taking a moment to respectfully address their concerns while also alluding to the immense geopolitical complexities he's navigating. If only everyone could engage with people they disagree with in this way, the world might be a bit better off for it. Netanyahu selects former Chief Justice Aaron Barak to collect trash on the highway for jury duty to herd Israel's civilization of stray cats. No, this week, Prime Minister Netanyahu selected the godfather of everything Bibi hates about Israel's courts to be the ad hoc judge sitting on the International Court of Justice's 15-judge panel as it adjudicates a petition submitted by South Africa charging Israel for committing genocide in Gaza. Even more unlikely than Netanyahu's bestowing an honor upon Barak is a response to the choice from Israeli media. Mere uniform applause. Haaretz, a publication not known for its endorsement of Netanyahu's political preferences, cheered the decision, calling Barak a flak jacket for Israel. J-Post joined the chorus, cheering the government's selection as brilliant and unexpected. Certain Israeli lawmakers, on the other hand, are still hung up on the ideological rivalry. Simcha Rothman, a member of the Religious Zionism Party and a main engineer of the judicial overhaul, posted on X, "My silence is deafening," apparently said with a glaring wink and a conspicuous nod. While Likud MK Tali Gottlieb added, Netanyahu, with his decision, has humiliated the right, humiliated his voters. He has no right. Let's take a look at this week in Jewish and Middle Eastern history. On this day in 2011, a popular uprising led to the end of the Tunisian president's 24-year reign. The uprising, known as the Jasmine Revolution, inspired a wave of similar protests across the Middle East and North Africa that you may remember as the Arab Spring. After a massacre of 300 Jews in Majorca in 1391, on this day in 1393, the governor of Majorca decreed any citizen who injures a Jew would be given the death penalty. Sounds good, but 42 years later, all the Jews in Majorca would be forcibly converted, and Jewish life in Majorca would go underground for centuries. Tuesday's the day that longtime secular ruler of Iran, known as the Shah, fled Iran as the Islamic Revolution took over the country. After the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait in 1990, Wednesday, January 17th is the anniversary of the U.S.'s first Gulf War military campaign, known as Operation Desert Storm. Saturday marks the day of the Wannsee Conference, when German government ministries came together to discuss the implementation of the final solution to the Jewish question, aka the Holocaust. So this Shabbat, as you're sitting and eating your cholent and your herring, or if you're Sephardic like me, your kibbeh and lahmacun, give a little extra FU to the Nazis. Looking ahead, keep an eye out on that court case in The Hague, how it impacts public discourse on the war, and if it convinces anyone of anything other than what they already believe.